You ever have one of those moments where your entire life feels fake? And nobody else notices? Not because something exploded. Not because somebody died. Not because there was screaming or drama. Mine happened on a delayed flight from Chicago to Seattle, while I sat staring at a cup of airport coffee that tasted like warm dirt. I remember looking out the window and thinking something that scared me more than signing my divorce papers ever did. If I disappeared tomorrow, would I actually miss my own life? I wish I could tell you that thought came from nowhere. It didn't. It came from years of pretending I was happy. It came from 12 years of marriage where I slowly became a supporting character in my own story. And I had absolutely no idea that the woman sitting beside me was about to change everything. My name is Natalie Brooks. I was 40 years old, recently divorced, and very good at acting like I had everything together. I had a stable job as a project manager, a nice apartment in Seattle, a respectable career, and exactly the kind of life people post smiling pictures about online. You know, those people who answer every question with "I'm good" before anyone even asks. That was me. I was always fine. Always okay. Always functioning. The problem was I wasn't living. I was surviving. And surviving can look a lot like living until somebody shows you the difference. The woman sitting next to me on that flight looked completely ordinary at first. She wasn't dressed like some movie character. No expensive outfit. No perfect hair. No dramatic entrance. She wore worn boots, dark jeans, and a green hoodie with paint stains on the sleeve. Her curly brown hair was tied back in a messy knot that looked accidental but somehow worked anyway. But there was something about her energy. She looked awake. Not physically awake. Alive awake. When the airline announced another 40-minute delay, people around us groaned. One guy actually slammed his laptop shut hard enough to scare everyone nearby. The woman beside me looked up from her book and smiled. "Honestly," she said, "this might be the universe forcing us to slow down." I looked over at her. Normally people who say things like that annoy me, but something about her didn't. Maybe because she wasn't trying to sound deep. Maybe because she actually believed it. She held out her hand. "Maya. Natalie." Then she looked at me for maybe 2 seconds and said something nobody had said to me in years. "You look exhausted." Not tired. Not stressed. Exhausted. And somehow a complete stranger figured out in 2 seconds what people in my life hadn't noticed in 2 years. I laughed awkwardly. "That obvious?" She shrugged. "Only because I know the look." I don't know why, but that sentence stayed with me. I know the look. 'Cause suddenly I wanted to know what that meant. We ended up talking during the delay. First it was normal stuff. Work. Travel. Terrible airport food. She was an artist who restored old murals and painted community projects around different cities. I remember thinking her job sounded impossible. Not impossible financially. Impossible emotionally. Because she sounded like somebody who actually loved what she did. I barely remembered what that felt like. Then she asked me a question. Not one of those polite questions people ask while waiting for their turn to speak. A real question. What did you want before everybody started telling you what you should want? I stared at her. Seriously stared. Because I didn't have an answer. Think about that. 40 years old. Career. Marriage. House. Responsibilities. Adult life. And I couldn't answer one simple question. What did I want? My marriage to Eric had been comfortable. Safe. Predictable. We had routines. Schedules. Plans. Everything looked right from the outside. But somewhere along the way I stopped asking myself what I needed. I became really good at adjusting. Really good at compromising. Really good at disappearing quietly. And suddenly some woman I met at an airport was making me realize I had no idea who I was anymore. The weird thing is our conversation should have ended there. Different flights. Different lives. End of story. Except it didn't. Because before boarding started, Maya pulled a folded receipt from her pocket and wrote her number on it. She handed it to me casually. "No pressure," she said. "But I think you need somebody to remind you that life is supposed to feel bigger than this." Then she walked away. No dramatic music. No movie moment. Just a woman disappearing into a crowd. For 3 days I kept that receipt in my purse. 3 days. I told myself I wasn't going to text her. I told myself it was weird. I told myself I was too old for random connections. Then on Thursday night, after eating microwave pasta alone while watching reruns of some cooking show I hated, I texted her. So, does the universe always force people to slow down? She replied immediately. Only the stubborn ones. And from there something started happening. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became walks. Walks became hours of talking. Hours became entire evenings disappearing without me noticing. And slowly I started remembering things. I remembered I liked laughing until my stomach hurt. I remembered I loved bookstores. I remembered I used to sketch buildings in notebooks. Tiny things. But tiny things matter. Because sometimes you don't lose yourself all at once. Sometimes you lose yourself inch by inch. Point 4 to 1500 hours to 1830. Then came the part that terrified me. Because one night we were sitting beside the water watching ferries cross the bay, and she looked over at me while smiling. Nothing huge happened. She just smiled. But suddenly my chest felt tight. Suddenly I noticed the way her eyes crinkled. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The way being around her made everything feel lighter. And one thought hit me so hard I actually stopped breathing for a second. Oh no. Because this wasn't friendship. Or at least not only friendship. I sat there staring at the water while panic started climbing up my throat. Because I was 40 years old. I had spent my entire life believing I knew exactly who I was. And suddenly I wasn't sure anymore. Maya looked over. You okay? I laughed nervously. No. She watched me quietly. Then she said something I still think about today. You don't have to figure out your entire life tonight, Natalie. Insight, 1830 to 1930. Here's what I learned. People think life changes during huge moments. Big speeches. Big decisions. Big dramatic events. Most of the time it doesn't. Life changes because of questions. Questions nobody asked before. Questions you were too scared to ask yourself. Because one honest question can tear down walls you spent years building. And maybe that's a good thing. If you've been living on autopilot. If you've been pretending you're okay because it's easier than explaining why you're not. If you've been shrinking yourself to fit inside a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore. Stop waiting. Because later turns into years faster than you think. And years eventually become your life. Subscribe and stay with me. Because sometimes the person who changes everything isn't somebody you were looking for. Sometimes they just sit beside you on a delayed flight. For the next few weeks, I lived in a strange middle ground where everything looked normal on the outside. But inside I felt like somebody had shaken up my entire world. I'd wake up, make coffee, answer emails, sit through meetings, smile at coworkers, and pretend I wasn't checking my phone every 10 minutes. I kept telling myself Maya was just a friend. Friends text each other. Friends get coffee. Friends spend Saturday afternoons wandering through bookstores and arguing over whether old paperbacks smell better than new ones. Right. The problem was my body apparently missed that meeting. Because every time her name lit up on my screen, I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. Every time she laughed, I felt lighter. Every time we said goodbye, I found myself wishing for 10 more minutes. And that scared me. Because fear does something funny. It makes you start bargaining with yourself. Maybe I was just lonely after the divorce. Maybe I was confusing comfort with attraction. Maybe I was emotionally attached because she'd shown up at the right time. Maybe. I kept throwing explanations at the problem because the truth felt too big to touch. Then one Saturday afternoon, Maya invited me to an outdoor art festival downtown. The place was crowded with families and music and food trucks. People everywhere. Normal day. Normal event. Nothing dramatic. We walked past paintings and sculptures while Maya stopped every few feet to admire tiny details nobody else seemed to notice. This one, she said, pointing at a mural. Look at the corner. I frowned. The corner. Yeah. I leaned closer. Tucked into the lower edge of the painting was this tiny little bird sitting on a branch. Most people would have missed it. I definitely would have. The artist didn't need to put that there, Maya said. Nobody would have noticed if they left it out. I looked at her. So why put it there? She smiled. Because beautiful things aren't always there for attention. I swear my heart forgot how to work for a second. Because I wasn't looking at the mural anymore. I was looking at her. And suddenly it hit me. Not slowly. Not gently. Like a truck. I liked her. Really liked her. Not in some abstract, confusing way. Not in some maybe way. I liked her in the kind of way that changes how rooms feel when somebody walks into them. And for the first time in weeks, I stopped trying to explain it away. I just sat there with the truth. Terrified. Completely terrified. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't discovering something new. It's realizing something true was sitting in front of you the whole time. And you were just too afraid to look at it. For the next few days, I did something people do when they're scared of losing control. I pulled away. Not dramatically. Not with some big speech. I just started creating little distances. I took longer to answer texts. I suddenly became busy with work. I canceled dinner plans because of fake deadlines that didn't exist. I told myself I needed space to think. But if I'm being honest, I wasn't creating space to think. I was creating space to hide. Because now the problem wasn't confusion anymore. The problem was truth. And truth is dangerous because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Maya noticed by the third day. Of course she did. People like Maya notice things. Especially the things you were trying to hide. She texted me Thursday evening. Did I do something wrong? I stared at the message for almost 10 minutes. Because there it was. The question I'd been avoiding. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. No, just busy. The second I sent it, I hated myself. Because that wasn't the truth. The truth was I missed her. I missed her stupid observations about strangers in coffee shops. I missed the way she laughed before finishing her own jokes. I missed hearing her say my name. I missed her. And suddenly avoiding her felt worse than being scared. Saturday afternoon there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Maya stood there holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag from the bakery near my office. She looked calm. Not angry. Not upset. Just serious. You've been disappearing, she said. I looked down at the coffee in her hand. Maya. No, she said softly. I think it's your turn to talk. She walked inside and sat on my couch like she'd done it 100 times before. I sat across from her and suddenly my apartment felt way too small. Way too quiet. Way too honest. For a few seconds neither of us said anything. Then Maya looked at me. Not through me. At me. You know what's funny? She said quietly. I swallowed. What? I met you at an airport and thought you looked lonely. I looked down. She continued. And now you don't look lonely anymore. I looked back up at her. You look scared. That hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. Again. I wasn't lonely anymore. I wasn't numb anymore. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was scared. Scared because feeling something real meant risking something real. And losing something real hurts a lot more than losing something fake. For a long moment I just sat there looking at her. Then I finally said the thing I'd been running from for weeks. I'm scared because I don't understand what's happening to me. Maya's expression softened. She moved closer but didn't touch me. Didn't rush me. Didn't rescue me. She just sat there. Waiting. And somehow that made me feel safer than anything else ever had. For a few seconds neither of us said anything. The city outside my apartment kept moving like nothing important was happening. Cars passed. Somebody laughed down on the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal sounds. Normal life. Meanwhile my heart felt like it was trying to break through my ribs. Maya sat beside me quietly, holding her coffee cup in both hands. No pressure. No interruption. Just patience. And somehow that made everything harder. Because when somebody gives you room to tell the truth, eventually you run out of places to hide. I looked down at my hands. I spent my whole life thinking I knew exactly who I was, I said quietly. I had plans. Marriage. House. Career. I followed every rule. I checked every box. Maya nodded but didn't say anything. And now I meet you. I laughed nervously. And suddenly I feel like somebody picked up my entire life and shook it. My eyes started filling before I even realized it. I don't understand why being around you feels different. Maya looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something so simple it almost annoyed me. You don't have to understand everything right now. I looked at her. What if this changes everything? She smiled a little. Natalie. Everything already changed. That sentence landed somewhere deep. Because she was right. Things had already changed. I laughed more. I smiled more. I noticed things again. I actually looked forward to tomorrow for the first time in years. This wasn't about some giant future decision. It wasn't about labels. It wasn't about explaining myself to the world. It was about the fact that I felt alive. And I hadn't felt alive in a very long time. Maya slowly reached over and took my hand. Not dramatically. Not like some movie scene. Just simple. Natural. Like she'd done it 100 times before. I looked down at our hands and my chest tightened. Not because it felt wrong. Because it felt right. Too right. The scary part wasn't that I wanted to pull away. The scary part was I didn't. For the first time in weeks, my brain stopped arguing with my heart. And for the first time in years, everything got quiet. Over the next few months, I stopped trying to solve myself like I was some broken puzzle. I stopped asking asterisk, what does this make me? Asterisk, and started asking a better question, asterisk, what makes me happy? Asterisk, funny enough, the answer kept leading me back to Maya. Not because she saved me. She didn't. She wasn't some magical person who fixed everything wrong in my life. She simply reminded me that I still existed underneath all the expectations, routines, and roles I'd been carrying for years. She reminded me that somewhere between being a wife, being responsible, and being who everyone needed me to be, I had disappeared. And slowly I started coming back. I started painting again. I started saying yes to random weekend trips. I laughed louder. I worried less. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Then one evening we were walking beside the water where we'd spent so many afternoons before, and Maya looked over at me smiling. "You're different," she said. I laughed. Good different or scary different? She squeezed my hand. Alive different. And standing there beside her, watching the sunset paint the water gold, I realized something. I hadn't found a new life. I hadn't become a different person. I had finally become myself. Here's the truth. Sometimes life doesn't fall apart because you're failing. Sometimes it falls apart because you've outgrown it. And sometimes the people who change your life don't arrive with fireworks and dramatic music. Sometimes they sit beside you on a delayed flight and ask one question nobody else ever asked. So if you're watching this and you've been surviving instead of living, if you've been shrinking yourself to fit into a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore, don't ignore that feeling. Because the life you're supposed to live might be waiting on the other side of one honest conversation. And if this story connected with you, subscribe and stay with me. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't starting over. Sometimes it's realizing your real story is just beginning.